This millionaire introduced 5 wealthy women to his 7-year-old daughter so she could choose a new mother. But the little girl rejected everyone. Then, in front of her shocked father, she chose the crying maid and said, "She is the one I love because she has always treated me like her real daughter." What the millionaire discovered next shook his entire family. Welcome everyone. If you are new here, please subscribe, like the video, and let me know where you are watching from. William Will Sterling was 30 years old, and throughout London his name was synonymous with success, elegance, power, and luxury. He owned entire residential blocks in Mayfair, restaurants in the wealthiest districts, an investment firm that was the talk of the financial press, and an immense townhouse with glass walls that looked directly out over the city lights. When Will entered a room, everyone turned to look. He was tall, athletic, always impeccably tailored, with that calm gaze of men who had learned never to show weakness. People thought he had everything. They saw the black cars waiting outside his house, the expensive watches on his wrist, the bespoke suits, the contracts signed in top-floor boardrooms, but no one saw what happened when he returned home at night. No one saw him take off his jacket, walk through the long, silent corridors of his house, and hear only the little footsteps of his daughter running toward him. His daughter's name was Lily. She was 7 years old, with a gentle face, deep eyes, and an intelligence that surprised even adults. Since her mother's passing, Lily had become the center of Will's universe. He could lose money, lose a contract, or lose a friendship, but he could never lose his daughter's smile. Every evening, even when he came home exhausted, he would go up to her room, sit on the edge of her bed, and listen to her little stories. Lily would tell him about her school, her drawings, her dolls, and her sometimes strange dreams, and Will would do his best to smile. But deep down, he was afraid. He was afraid his daughter would grow up with an empty void in her heart. He feared she would lack a mother's presence, a warmth that a father, despite all his love, could not always provide in the same way. So he began to think about remarriage, not because he had forgotten his late wife, but because he wanted Lily to have someone close to her, a woman capable of brushing her hair with patience, talking to her when she was scared, and holding her tight when Will was away at work. He believed that by choosing carefully he could rebuild a family. But Will was a wealthy man, and around him many women did not see his heart. They saw his name, his estate, his money, his reputation, and above all, the lifestyle they could lead if they became Mrs. Sterling. At first, Will didn't want to believe this. He thought he could recognize sincerity because he had negotiated with powerful men, signed complex deals, and avoided betrayals in the business world. But he did not yet understand that a child's heart sometimes sees more clearly than an adult's eyes. The first woman he introduced to Lily was Scarlett. She was a model, breathtakingly beautiful, always flawless, with long, lustrous hair, elegant designer dresses, and a smile that seemed tailor-made for cameras. Will had met her at a charity gala. She spoke softly to him, claiming to love children and asserting that a house without a child's laughter was a house without a soul. Will had been touched by her words. So he invited her one Saturday afternoon for lunch with Lily. Scarlett arrived with a large pink box filled with very expensive toys. She knelt before Lily, handed her the box, and told her she had chosen all of this especially for her. Lily stared at her for a long time without smiling. She took a small teddy bear, politely said thank you, and then remained quiet throughout the meal. Will tried to spark a conversation, but Lily barely responded. Scarlett laughed loudly, touched Will's arm, spoke of trips to Paris, holidays in Italy, and fine jewelry. Every now and then, she glanced at Lily as if to remind herself that the child was there. After the meal, Will received an urgent call and stepped out onto the terrace for a few minutes. Scarlett, believing no one was listening, leaned toward Lily with a much less gentle expression and told her that a well-behaved little girl shouldn't be so cold to her father's guests. Lily lowered her eyes. Scarlett added that if she ever moved into this house, Lily would have to learn to be more cheerful because no woman would want to live with a difficult child. When Will returned, Scarlett immediately flashed her wide smile, asked Lily if she wanted a hug, but the little girl quietly backed away. That evening, Will asked his daughter what she thought of Scarlett. Lily simply said she didn't want her. Will was surprised but did not push. He figured Lily just needed time. The second woman was Victoria. She was a brilliant, wealthy lawyer, highly respected in the corporate world. She spoke with confidence, knew proper etiquette, and seemed perfectly capable of running a large household. Will thought a woman like her could set an example of strength and discipline for Lily. Victoria arrived without unnecessary gifts, which Will appreciated. She spoke to Lily as if she were an adult, asking about her school marks, her ambitions, and her activities, before explaining that a girl of her age should already be thinking about how to become exceptional. Lily listened, but her small hands remained clenched under the table. Later, when Will was showing a departing guest to the door, Victoria told Lily that she was very lucky to be born rich, but that overprotected children became weak. She warned her that with her around, there would be no crying over nothing, no tantrums, and no begging for attention every 5 minutes. Lily did not reply. She only looked at her mother's portrait hanging on the living room wall. That evening, when Will asked for her opinion, Lily said no again. Will sighed but respected her decision. The third woman was Chloe, a well-known London influencer. She had millions of followers, a charming laugh, and a way of speaking that made every moment feel like it had to be filmed. She arrived with a discreet camera crew, claiming she only wanted to capture some footage of the house's decor, but very quickly she suggested making a short video with Lily. Will politely refused, explaining that his daughter was not an attraction. Chloe smiled and said she understood. Yet the moment Will stepped away, she pulled out her phone and asked Lily to smile for a quick photo. Just one, because her followers would love to see the future little princess of London. Lily hid her face. Chloe lost her patience for a second, just long enough for the little girl to notice. She whispered that such a fortunate child should learn to be more grateful. Later, in front of Will, she stroked Lily's hair, saying she was adorable. But Lily gently pulled her head away. That evening, she said no once again. The fourth woman was Beatrice. She came from a prominent, wealthy family and had known Will for a long time. Everyone around him said it would be a perfect match, a union of two similar worlds, fortunes, and powerful names. Beatrice had organized dinners, spoken to journalists, and smiled at business partners. She was elegant, cultured, and poised. During dinner, she complimented Lily, spoke of the beauty of the house, the importance of a proper upbringing, and explained to Will that a child needed strict structure so as not to grow up too fragile. Will nodded without being fully convinced. Later, Lily accidentally knocked over a glass of water on the tablecloth. It was almost nothing, but Beatrice looked at her with coldness. She did not yell, she did not make a scene, but she said in a low voice that an heiress must learn not to behave like a scullery maid. Those words settled in Lily's heart like a heavy stone. Daisy, the maid, who was passing near the dining room, heard the comment. She said nothing because she knew her place, but she gently fetched a cloth and cleaned up the spill without making Lily feel like she had made a mistake. She smiled at Lily discreetly, as if to say it was no big deal. Lily looked at Daisy with gratitude. That evening she rejected Beatrice. Will began to feel lost. The fifth woman arrived a few weeks later. Her name was Penelope. She appeared sweet, worked in humanitarian aid, and spoke often of kindness. Will thought he had finally found someone different. Penelope seemed to listen to Lily, asking what she liked to eat, what cartoons she watched, and what her favorite color was. Lily seemed slightly less guarded, and Will felt a spark of hope. But one afternoon, Penelope asked for a tour of the house. In the corridor, she spotted Daisy carrying a laundry basket. Daisy was 25 years old. She was very beautiful, but with a simple, natural beauty. No jewelry, no expensive makeup, no arrogance. She had been working in the house for nearly 2 years. Coming from a modest neighborhood, she had lost her parents at a young age and learned early on to survive without ever complaining. She spoke little, worked diligently, and above all, loved Lily in a silent, sincere way. She knew exactly which hot chocolate the little girl preferred, which pajamas comforted her on stormy nights, and which soft song would soothe her tears. Penelope looked down on her and asked Will why such a young woman was still working as a domestic servant instead of looking for something better. Will simply replied that Daisy was a trustworthy person. Penelope smiled, but later, when Will was out of earshot, she told Daisy that she should avoid getting too attached to rich children, because at the end of the day, servants remained servants. Lily heard everything from the corridor. She saw Daisy lower her eyes without responding, not because she was weak, but because she had learned that answering back to humiliations could cost dearly when you had no power. That evening, when Will asked Lily if Penelope could visit again, Lily looked at him with eyes full of sadness and said no for the 5th time. Will did not get angry, but he was deeply discouraged. He loved his daughter more than anything, but he could not understand what she was looking for. He had introduced her to beautiful, wealthy, intelligent, and respected women, and none of them pleased her. One evening, after a long day at work, Will found Lily sitting alone in the grand library. She was holding an old photograph of her mother against her chest. The city lights shone through the windows, casting golden reflections on her sad face. Will approached quietly and sat down beside her. He was no longer wearing his corporate suit. He was no longer the powerful London businessman. He was just a worried father. He asked Lily why she kept rejecting every woman he introduced to her. He told her that he did not want to replace her mother, that he knew no one could ever take her place, but that he only wanted her to have a kind woman by her side, someone to love her when he couldn't be there. Lily remained silent for a long time, then placed the photo on her lap and asked her father if he truly wanted to know the truth. Will felt his heart tighten. He said yes. Then Lily explained to him in simple, childish words, words that struck harder than any grand adult speeches. She told him that Scarlett only smiled when he was looking, that Victoria wanted to make her harsh instead of understanding her, that Chloe wanted to show her off to the world like a doll, that Beatrice looked at her with shame when she made a mistake, and that Penelope despised Daisy because she wore a uniform. Will sat motionless. Every sentence felt like discovering a hidden room in his own house. He asked why she hadn't told him sooner. Lily lowered her eyes and replied that she was afraid he would think she was jealous or mean. She said she knew her father wanted to be happy, and she didn't want to break his heart. Those words shattered Will more than any business betrayal ever could. He pulled his daughter into his arms and promised her that he would never force her to accept anyone who did not truly respect her. Then, almost in a whisper, he asked her who she would choose if she could choose for herself. Lily did not even hesitate. She turned her face toward the half-open library door where Daisy had just discreetly passed carrying a tray of empty cups, and she said that if she could choose a mother, she would choose Daisy. Will was left speechless. For a few seconds, he thought he had misheard. Daisy, the maid. Daisy, who lived in a small room on the top floor of the house. Daisy, who always lowered her eyes when wealthy guests entered. Daisy, who possessed nothing but her dignity, her courage, and her tired hands. Will looked at his daughter, searching for any sign of hesitation, but Lily was entirely serious. She told him that Daisy didn't give her gifts to impress anyone, but she brought her water when she coughed at night. She said Daisy didn't talk about loving her in front of guests, but she stayed by her bed when she had nightmares. She said Daisy didn't wear expensive dresses, but she had the most comforting arms in the world. She told him about a day at school when a girl had teased her for not having a mother anymore, and Daisy was the only one who noticed she was crying when she got home. Daisy hadn't asked questions. She had simply sat her down in the kitchen, given her a piece of cake, wiped away her tears, and told her that some people leave too soon, but the love they leave behind never dies. Will felt his eyes burn. He had no idea Daisy had done all of this. He had not known that in this house full of marble, paintings, and expensive furniture, the true warmth came from a young woman he greeted every morning without really looking at her. That night, after putting Lily to bed, Will went down to the kitchen. Daisy was there, putting away the last of the plates. She wore her simple uniform, her hair tied back, her face tired but peaceful. When she saw Will enter, she immediately stood up straight, thinking he needed something. Will asked her to sit down for a few minutes. Daisy hesitated. In her world, a maid did not sit at her employer's table without a reason. But Will insisted gently. He asked her how long she had been watching over Lily like this, hiding her acts of tenderness behind her chores. Daisy lowered her eyes, embarrassed. She replied that she had done nothing extraordinary, that a child needed attention, and that Lily was a sweet little girl carrying a great sadness in her small heart. Will looked at her differently for the first time. He noticed the exhaustion beneath her eyes, the gentleness in her voice, and the way she spoke of Lily not as a chore, but as someone precious. He asked her why she had never told him when certain guests had disrespected Lily or her. Daisy replied that she didn't want to cause trouble, that she knew those women belonged to his world, not hers, and that she was only there to work. Will felt a silent shock. He had believed himself to be an attentive father, a just man, a decent employer. Yet under his own roof, women had hurt his daughter and humiliated Daisy while he looked the other way. From that night on, something shifted in the Sterling household. Will did not rush. He made no grand declarations. He did not want to confuse gratitude with love, nor did he want to put Daisy in a difficult position. But he began to observe. He watched how Daisy spoke to Lily when she thought no one was listening. He saw her encouraging Lily to finish her homework, teaching her to fold her clothes, reminding her to say thank you to the driver and the cook, not because they were paid, but because they were human beings. He saw her laugh softly when Lily got flour on her nose. He watched her drape a blanket over the little girl's shoulders when she fell asleep on the sofa. He saw her rearrange the portrait of Lily's mother with utmost respect, as if she knew that the love of a new woman should never erase the memory of the first. Slowly, Will understood that Daisy had already given his daughter what he had been desperately searching for in other women. But understanding this did not make things simple. Will was a well-known millionaire. Daisy was his employee. He knew the world would judge. He knew the newspapers would mock them. He knew his friends would say a maid was just trying to take advantage of his fortune, even though Daisy had never asked for a single extra pound, and even though she sometimes refused the small gifts Lily wanted to give her. He also knew Daisy herself might feel insulted if he spoke of love too quickly, as if her kindness to Lily were a debt to be repaid. So Will took his time. He began by showing her more respect. He asked for her opinion on Lily's meals, her school, and her fears. At first, Daisy answered cautiously, but Will listened to her with genuine interest. A week later, he caught her mending an old doll of Lily's whose arm had come detached. The doll had belonged to Lily's mother. Lily had cried all morning, and Daisy had spent her break trying to sew it back together. Will stood at the doorway without making a sound. He watched Daisy's hands working with such patience, and his heart filled with an emotion he hadn't felt in a long time. It was not a loud, sudden spark of infatuation. It was something far deeper and far more dangerous, because it did not stem from outward beauty, but from the truth of a person. Daisy looked up and saw him. She stood up immediately, confused, but Will told her to carry on. He sat opposite her and asked where she had learned to sew. Daisy smiled faintly and shared that her mother used to mend the neighbors' clothes when she was little. She spoke of her life simply, without seeking pity. She talked about her neighborhood, the difficult nights, the jobs she had taken on too young, and the doors that had closed because she didn't have a prestigious degree. She also spoke of the dreams she had tucked away in a corner of her heart just to survive. She had once wanted to open a small school for underprivileged children, a place where no one would be treated as inferior because their clothes were old or their parents had no money. Will listened to her as if listening to a long-forgotten song. He was discovering a woman who had suffered without becoming hard, who had been humiliated without becoming cruel, and who had received little love from life but still had so much to give to others. Meanwhile, Lily was changing too. She smiled more, ate better, and spoke more at school. Her teacher even called Will to say his daughter seemed much lighter in recent weeks. Will knew why. Daisy was there. Daisy. But the peace did not last long. In the world of the wealthy, changes never remain secret. One Sunday, Will's mother, Lady Margaret Sterling, arrived without warning. She was an elegant, cold woman, accustomed to controlling her family's public image. She had always believed Will should marry a woman of his own social standing, someone capable of holding her own at galas, in front of journalists, and at charity committee meetings. She loved Lily in her own way, but she believed that love should always be well-dressed, well-presented, and well-organized. The moment she entered the townhouse, she noticed something. Lily ran to Daisy to show her a drawing before even properly greeting her grandmother. Daisy tried to step back, embarrassed, but Lily naturally held her hand. Lady Margaret observed this scene with narrow eyes. Later, over tea, she asked Will why his daughter seemed so attached to the staff. Will replied calmly that Daisy was very important to Lily. Lady Margaret set her cup down slowly and warned him that one had to be careful because servants who became too close sometimes forgot their place. Will felt anger rise, but he stayed calm for Lily's sake. Daisy, who was bringing in a plate of biscuits, overheard the remark. Her face hardly changed, but her hands trembled slightly. Lily saw this. She stood up abruptly and told her grandmother that Daisy was not just a maid, but her friend. Lady Margaret smiled coldly and replied that a little girl did not yet understand the difference between affection and self-interest. This time, Will intervened. His voice was low but firm. He asked his mother never to speak of Daisy that way in his house again. Lady Margaret was shocked. She was not used to her son speaking to her like that. She realized then that it wasn't just about Lily. She looked at Will, then at Daisy, then back at Will, and a look of suspicion crossed her face. After Lady Margaret left, Daisy asked Will for permission to resign if her presence was causing problems in the family. Will's heart tightened. He told her she had done nothing wrong. Daisy replied that she knew this world, and that a woman like her was respected as long as she cleaned in silence, but became a problem the moment a rich child loved her too much, or a powerful man looked at her for too long. Will did not know what to say, because she was telling the truth. Over the next few days, Daisy became more distant. She continued to care for Lily gently, but she avoided Will. She no longer stayed in a room when he entered, shared no idle conversation, and lowered her eyes just as she had on her very first day. Will understood she was trying to protect her dignity, her job, and perhaps her heart. Lily immediately felt that something was wrong. One evening, she asked Daisy if she was going to leave. Daisy smiled sadly and replied that she would always be in her heart, even if life took her elsewhere one day. Lily burst into tears. Will heard her crying from his study and rushed upstairs. He found his daughter clinging to Daisy as if someone were trying to tear away her last light. Daisy tried to calm her, but her own eyes were wet. Will stood at the door, deeply moved. He realized this bond was no longer simple affection. To Lily, Daisy was already a mother in her heart, and to him, Daisy had become the woman he had been searching for without knowing she was there all along. But how could he say it without hurting her, without making it seem like he wanted to buy her love, or making the world think she had manipulated a child to get into a wealthy family. That night, Will barely slept. He paced his study until dawn, watching the London lights fade. As the morning light broke, he thought of his first wife, of the promise he had made her to protect Lily. He thought of all the women he had introduced to his daughter. He thought of Daisy, her tired hands, her gentle voice, and her dream of a school for poor children. And for the first time in a long while, he didn't care what people would say. He only asked himself what was right. The next morning, he made a decision. He called his lawyer and asked for Daisy's employment contract to be modified immediately, not to bring her closer to him, but to give her real security. He set up a trust fund in her name to fund her studies if she wanted to return to training, and a social project for the school she had spoken of. But when Daisy found out, she was hurt instead of happy. She walked into Will's study, her face pale, and asked him why he was doing all of this. Will replied that he wanted to help her. Daisy shook her head and said she did not want to be a charity project. She did not want her kindness toward Lily to become a reason to receive money. She did not want people saying she had earned a reward by playing mother. Those words struck Will hard. He realized that while he had meant well, he had still acted like a man accustomed to solving problems with his wealth. He apologized sincerely. He told her he had never wanted to humiliate her, that he had simply been moved by her dream, but that she was right. Daisy took a deep breath, then said she accepted his apologies but preferred to keep her place. Will looked at her and replied softly that that was precisely the problem. She always spoke of her place as if she were beneath others, whereas in his eyes she possessed more nobility than any woman he had ever met. Daisy stood motionless. Her eyes glistened, but she turned her face away. She whispered that he shouldn't say such things, because in their world, words could ruin a woman like her. A few days later, an event forced Will to face the truth in front of everyone. He had to host a grand reception at his house to celebrate a new property development project. Investors, journalists, wealthy friends, local politicians, and family members were invited. Lady Margaret insisted that Will invite Beatrice, the woman she still preferred for him. Will initially refused, but Beatrice was invited by another partner and arrived anyway, wearing a stunning dress with the smile of a woman convinced the world would eventually give her what she wanted. The house was filled with soft music, sparkling glasses, and elegant conversation. Lily wore a pretty white dress, but stayed close to Daisy in the kitchen because she didn't like large parties. Daisy was working alongside the other staff, carrying trays and ensuring everything ran smoothly. Will tried to stay focused on his guests, but his gaze constantly searched for Daisy. Beatrice noticed this. Later in the evening, she followed Daisy into a quiet corridor where no one was looking. She stepped in front of her with a malicious smile and whispered that she must be very clever to have made herself indispensable to a fragile child. Daisy remained calm and replied that she did not want any trouble. Beatrice stepped closer and murmured that a maid could play mother in the hallways, but she would never be the wife of a man like William Sterling. She added that if Daisy had any honor, she would leave this house before dragging the family name through the mud. Daisy gripped the tray in her hands. She could have answered back, but she thought of Lily, her job, and her fragile life. So she lowered her eyes. But this time, Lily had heard everything. She was standing at the end of the corridor, her fists clenched, her eyes filled with tears. Beatrice turned around too late. Lily ran toward Daisy, standing in front of her like a little shield, and screamed that no one had the right to speak to her like that. The corridor fell silent. A few nearby guests turned around. Will arrived quickly, drawn by his daughter's voice. He saw Lily shaking with anger, Daisy pale and humiliated, and Beatrice frozen in her elegant pose. He asked what was happening. Beatrice tried to smile, pretending it was a misunderstanding, that Lily had misconstrued an adult conversation. But Lily, with all the strength of her little heart, declared in front of everyone that Beatrice had insulted Daisy, saying a maid was not worthy of being loved by her father. A whisper rippled through the guests. Daisy closed her eyes, ashamed of becoming the centre of a spectacle. Will looked at Beatrice, then at his mother who had just arrived in the corridor, and then at all the wealthy faces waiting for his reaction. At that moment, he understood that his entire life was dividing into two paths. On the first, he could protect his image, quiet the scandal, send Daisy away, and continue living the life others wanted him to live. On the second, he could stand up for the truth, even if it cost him his comfort, his reputation, and the approval of his social circle. Will stepped toward his daughter, placed a hand on her shoulder, and then turned to Daisy. He did not speak loudly, but his voice carried down the corridor. He said that in this house no one would ever be humiliated because of their job, their background, or their uniform. He said that Daisy had shown more respect, more love, and more dignity than many of the people present that night. Then he asked Beatrice to leave his house. Beatrice flushed with shame. Lady Margaret tried to intervene, but Will raised his hand to stop her. He declared that the evening was over for anyone who believed a bank account gave them the right to despise another human being. The guests were shocked. Some left in silence. Others pretended they hadn't heard, but everyone understood that something had shattered in the Sterling household. Overwhelmed, Daisy tried to slip away to the kitchen, but Lily held her back. Will looked at her with a sincerity he could no longer hide. Daisy realized then that the greatest danger was no longer the humiliation from others. The greatest danger was this silent feeling growing between her and Will, a feeling impossible to ignore but perhaps too heavy to bear. After that evening, nothing was ever quite the same. The corridors remained, the chandeliers still shone, and the large windows still overlooked the London skyline, but the air felt different, as if a long-hidden truth had finally come to light. Daisy continued her work the next morning, but she did so with a heavier silence than usual. She avoided Will's eyes, cleared dishes faster, left rooms the moment he entered, and even Lily could feel her fear. The little girl didn't understand why adults always complicated simple things. To her, Daisy was kind. Daisy loved her. Daisy protected her, and her father was happier when Daisy was near. So why did the world have to judge it as a mistake? Will spent the day shut in his office, but he barely did any work. He kept thinking about the reception, Daisy's hurt face, Lily's anger, the shocked looks of the guests, and above all, Beatrice's words, "A maid would never be worthy of being loved by a man like him." The phrase disgusted him, but it also scared him, because he knew many people thought exactly the same way without daring to say it out loud. He knew that if he took a step toward Daisy, the world wouldn't see a courageous, sincere woman. They would see a servant who had successfully integrated herself into a wealthy family. He knew the tabloids would print lies, his mother would be furious, his partners would mock him in secret, and Daisy would be the first to suffer. Yet every time he tried to imagine his life without her, the house grew cold again. That evening, Will found Daisy alone in the kitchen, preparing Lily's lunch for the next day. He entered quietly and asked if she was all right. Daisy said yes, but her voice trembled. Will told her she had no reason to feel ashamed of what had happened, that Beatrice was the only one to blame. Daisy slowly set down the knife she was holding and told him he didn't understand. For him, it was just a difficult evening. For her, it could become her whole life. She told him that women like her didn't have the luxury of being at the center of scandals because they had no powerful family name to protect them. She said that if she stayed, people would accuse her of taking advantage of Lily. If she left, Lily would suffer. If she accepted his help, they would say she had been bought. If she refused, she would lose perhaps the only family she had known in a long time. Will remained silent because every word was true. Then Daisy added in a lower voice that she loved Lily sincerely, but she had never wanted to take her mother's place, nor cause trouble in Will's life. Will stepped closer, but kept a respectful distance. He told her that no one could ever replace Lily's mother, but love wasn't always a replacement. Sometimes love was a second light in a house that had grown too dark. Daisy looked up at him, and for a moment neither of them spoke. In that silence lay everything they didn't dare say out loud. The next day, Lady Margaret Sterling returned. But this time, she wasn't just there for tea, she came to regain control. She walked into Will's study with a stern expression and told him he was destroying the family's reputation. She reminded him of the Sterling name, the years of respect, the business connections, the foundations, the galas, and the papers. She told him that a man of his standing could not be guided by the whims of a 7-year-old child or the sweetness of an employee. Will listened without interrupting. Then Lady Margaret said the one thing she shouldn't have. She said Daisy had to leave for Lily's own good. Will stood up slowly. He asked his mother if she truly wanted to rip away from his little girl, the only woman who had comforted her during her nightmares, simply because that woman wore an apron instead of a luxury dress. Lady Margaret replied that affection wasn't enough to build a family. It required status, education, and stability. Will countered that Daisy had more stability in her heart than any of the women they had introduced to him. Lady Margaret grew cold, warning him that he would regret this weakness. Will replied that his only true weakness had been letting others decide what was best for his daughter. From the corridor, Lily heard parts of the argument. She clutched her old teddy bear, the one her mother had given her before she died. Daisy found her there, trembling. She tried to lead her away, but Lily asked if she was really going to leave. Daisy didn't answer right away. She stroked the little girl's hair and told her that sometimes adults had to make difficult decisions to protect those they loved. Lily shook her head and said she didn't want to be protected by people leaving anymore. Her mother had already gone forever, and she didn't want to lose Daisy too. Those words broke Daisy's heart. She knelt before Lily, held her close, and for the first time did not hide her tears. Will came out of the office at that moment and saw them together. His mother saw them too. Lady Margaret looked at the scene with less harshness than before, but her pride was still stronger than her emotion. She left without saying goodbye. The days that followed were difficult. Rumours began to circulate in London's high society circles. Some said Will had lost his mind. Others claimed Daisy had manipulated Lily. Photos from the reception appeared in gossip columns with cruel headlines. The Belgravia millionaire defends his maid before the elite. Who is Daisy really? Will wanted to have the articles taken down, but Daisy asked him not to. She said that the more he tried to defend her with his power, the more people would believe she was hiding something. So she kept working, her head held high. Even when some guests cancelled their visits, even when other staff whispered behind her back, and even when she received anonymous messages telling her to stay in her place. Lily became even more protective. She refused to eat unless Daisy sat down with her, even if just for a few minutes. She drew pictures of 3 people together, always the same: her father, Daisy, and herself, in front of a small house under a huge sun. One evening, Will found one of these drawings on his desk. Above the 3 figures, Lily had written in her clumsy childhood handwriting, "My family, when no one is looking." Will stared at the sentence for a long time. It said everything. His daughter didn't need a picture-perfect family for photos. She needed a real family, even if the world refused to understand. That night, Will made a decision he should have made long ago. He would no longer discuss things first with lawyers, journalists, his mother, or his friends. He would speak to Daisy as a man speaks to a woman he respects. He found her in the conservatory, sitting near the plants with a children's book on her lap. Lily had just fallen asleep on the sofa after insisting on a story. Will sat opposite Daisy and told her he did not want to impose his world on her, nor offer her a life that would suffocate her, nor put her in a golden cage. He told her he knew she hadn't entered his house looking for a rich husband, and that was exactly why he admired her. Daisy lowered her eyes. Will continued, telling her that what he felt for her did not come from a void, nor from pity, nor gratitude. It was born from all the small things she did when no one was looking: her patience, her kindness, the way she respected the memory of Lily's mother, and her courage to remain gentle in a world that had often humiliated her. Daisy wept silently. She told him she was afraid of loving him, afraid of being judged, afraid Lily would suffer if it all failed, and afraid of waking up one day to find she had only been a passing phase in the life of a man so different from her. Will told her he couldn't promise the world would be gentle, but he could promise one thing: he would never let her face that world alone if they chose to move forward together. Daisy did not say yes that night, nor did she say no. She asked for time. Will respected that. For several weeks they learned to know each other differently, not as boss and employee, not as millionaire and maid, but as two human beings who had both lost something and were trying not to let fear make their decisions. Daisy officially left her position in the house, not because she was dismissed, but because Will wanted their relationship to be clear and dignified. He offered her independent housing, but she initially refused, saying she could manage on her own. Eventually, she accepted only temporary help in the form of an advance to take evening classes because she wanted to earn every step in her life. Will respected this too. He learned that love did not mean giving everything to feel like a savior, but helping the other without stripping them of their pride. Lily, for her part, lived through this period with impatience. She often asked her father when Daisy would come back for dinner. Will told her they had to give Daisy some space to breathe. Lily replied that she herself breathed better when Daisy was there. Gradually, Daisy returned to their lives, but differently. She came to share dinner, to help Lily with her homework, and to walk with them in Hyde Park on Sundays. People looked at them. Some recognized Will, some took photos. Daisy sometimes pulled her coat tightly around herself, uneasy, but Will remained calm. Lily held her hand, and little by little, Daisy understood she didn't have to hide to exist. One autumn afternoon, as they walked beneath the golden trees of Hyde Park, Lily stopped in front of a balloon seller. Will bought her a heart-shaped balloon. Lily handed it to Daisy and told her she didn't need to be perfect, she just needed to stay. Daisy bent down to kiss her forehead, and as Will watched them, he knew his heart had made its choice long ago. But the final obstacle was Lady Margaret. Despite everything, Will loved his mother, and he knew Lily needed her grandmother. He did not want to build a new family on a war. So he invited Lady Margaret to dinner, just her, Daisy, Lily, and himself. Daisy was nervous. She wore a simple midnight blue dress with no expensive jewelry, making no attempt to look like the women from Will's social circle. She arrived with a small cake she had baked herself because she didn't want to come empty-handed. Lady Margaret watched her in silence. The dinner began, and Margaret asked polite questions, though each sentence seemed to harbour a judgment. She asked Daisy what she planned to do with her life now that she was no longer working in the house. Daisy replied calmly that she was resuming her studies, wanting to work with vulnerable children, perhaps to open a small school or a shelter one day. Lady Margaret asked if she truly felt ready for a life in the public eye, a life where her every move would be watched. Daisy took a deep breath and replied that she wasn't ready to live under the public gaze, but she was ready to stop letting that gaze define her worth. Will looked at her with pride. Lily smiled. Lady Margaret did not reply. Later in the evening, Lily went upstairs to fetch her old photo album. She placed it on her grandmother's lap and pointed to a picture of her mother. She said her mummy would always be her mummy, but her heart still had room for someone else she loved. Lady Margaret looked at her granddaughter. For the first time, she didn't see a sterling heiress to be protected. She saw a child who had already lost too much. Lily took Daisy's hand, then Lady Margaret's hand, and placed them together. No one spoke. Daisy was about to pull her hand away, but Lady Margaret held it gently. The gesture didn't erase all the wounds, but it opened a door. At the end of the dinner, Lady Margaret told Daisy she might have misjudged a few things. It wasn't a grand apology, but for a woman like Lady Margaret, it was monumental. Daisy simply replied that she understood a mother's fear. Lady Margaret nodded, and in her eyes, Will saw something change. A few months later, Will took Daisy and Lily into the illuminated garden of their home. It was not a huge reception, not a gala, not a show for the papers. There were only a few close, sincere friends, soft lights, white flowers, and the London sky above them. Lily wore a light-coloured dress and held a small box in her hands. Daisy thought it was just a simple family dinner, but when Will stopped in front of her, her heart understood before her mind could accept it. Will took Daisy's hand and told her he had spent his life building tall buildings, but she had taught him that a man's true greatness was not found in what he owned, but in how he loved and respected the people who had nothing to offer him in return. He told her she had loved Lily in silence, brought warmth back to a cold house, and taught him to see with his heart. Then he knelt before her. Lily opened the little box with trembling hands. Inside was a simple, beautiful ring. Daisy covered her mouth, her eyes filling with tears. Will asked her if she would marry him, not to replace anyone, not to prove anything to the world, but to build a real family with him, free and full of love. Daisy did not answer right away. She looked at Lily, who was already crying quietly. The little girl whispered that she had chosen her from the very first day Daisy had wiped her tears without asking for anything. So Daisy said yes. Lily threw herself into her arms. Will held them both close, and for a few seconds the noise of London seemed to fade away. There was no wealth, no judgment, no class difference. There was only a man, a woman, and a child who had finally found their home in one another's hearts. The wedding took place in the spring. Despite the rumors, the criticism, and those waiting for a scandal, the ceremony was beautiful, simple, and deeply moving. Daisy wore a graceful, elegant white gown, not overly luxurious, but full of poise. Will wore a dark suit, and for the first time in years, his smile held nothing forced. Lily walked before them as a flower girl with a small bouquet, proud as a princess. Not a princess from cold fairy tale, but a princess who had saved her father from loneliness by choosing with her heart. In the church, some guests still whispered. A few of Will's old acquaintances looked at Daisy with curiosity, trying to understand how a former maid had ended up there. But when Daisy walked down the aisle, her head held high, holding the arm of Lady Margaret, who had agreed to accompany her for those final steps, the murmurs faded. Lady Margaret had not become perfect. She still had her pride, her habits, her fears. But she had understood that protecting a family didn't mean choosing the wealthiest person. It meant recognizing the one who truly loved. When Will saw Daisy arrive, his eyes grew damp. He did not see her modest past, her old uniform, or the judgments attached to her name. He saw the woman who had mended his daughter's heart without ever asking for a reward. During the ceremony, Lily stood between them, holding their hands. During the vows, Will promised Daisy to respect her dreams as much as his love. Daisy promised Will never to forget the little girl who had brought them together, and to build a home with him where no one would be judged by their money, their work, or their background. After exchanging rings, Lily reached up for them to lean down, then kissed them both on the cheeks. The guests laughed softly, several wept, and even those who had come out of curiosity understood they were not watching a scandal. They were watching a family being born. After the wedding, life did not become a flawless fairy tale, because real human stories never become perfect overnight. There were still articles, still remarks, still people claiming Daisy had just gotten lucky, as if goodness, patience, and courage were not just as precious as money. But Daisy no longer tried to hide. With Will's support, but also with her own strength, she completed her studies and, a few years later, opened a centre for vulnerable children in Hackney. She called it the Second Light because she believed that even after a great loss, a new light could enter a life without erasing the old one. Lily went there often with her. She helped distribute books, prepare snacks, and talk to children who, like her once, carried a sadness too heavy for their age. Will funded the center, but he let Daisy run it her way because he had learned that love should not crush another's dreams under the weight of gifts. In their home, the portrait of Lily's mother remained in its place. Daisy would sometimes place fresh flowers there, not out of obligation, but out of respect. She told Lily that her mummy had been the first light of her life and that she, Daisy, was simply grateful to walk alongside that light. Lily grew up with this sweet truth. She never felt she had betrayed her mother by loving Daisy. On the contrary, she understood that sincere love does not steal someone's place. It expands the heart so that no one is forgotten. One evening, several years after their wedding, Will came home late from a meeting. He found Daisy and Lily in the kitchen, laughing with flour on their hands. They were baking a cake for the center's anniversary. Lily had grown, but her gaze had kept its same depth. Daisy still possessed that simple beauty, but her face now wore a new peace. Will stopped at the entrance and watched them. He thought back to the time when he believed he had to look for a perfect woman in the wealthy parties of London. He thought of Scarlett, Victoria, Chloe, Beatrice, Penelope, and all those women who knew how to smile in front of him but didn't know how to love his daughter when no one was looking. Then he looked at Daisy, wearing an apron covered in flour, laughing because Lily had just messed up a decoration. This was what he had been searching for. Not a perfect image, not a useful alliance, not another name in the papers. A woman laughing in his kitchen, a daughter who felt loved, a home full of warmth. Lily spotted her father and asked him to come and help. Will took off his suit jacket, rolled up his sleeves, and stepped into the kitchen. Daisy looked at him with tenderness. He kissed her on the forehead, then took a little flour and gently dabbed it on Lily's nose. The little girl giggled in protest. Daisy shook her head, and while the city lights sparkled behind the windows, Will understood that he had never been as rich as he was that night. The lesson of this story is simple. The eyes can be impressed by beauty, money, and fine words, but the heart always recognizes sincerity. Will was looking for a perfect woman for his daughter. But Lily had understood before him that love is not measured by expensive dresses, degrees, luxury homes, or grand speeches. It is seen in simple gestures, in patience, in respect, and in how a person treats you when no one is looking. Daisy had no fortune, but she had something money could never buy, a true heart. So, never look down on anyone because of their work, their background, or their situation. For sometimes, the person whom the world looks down upon is the very one placed there to mend an entire family. Thank you for watching. Subscribe, like the video, and share this with your friends and family.